There seemed to be something that made NASA think that the moon was hollow. Apollo 12 mission, they intentionally launched a lunar lander into the moon, and it rang and reverberated for over an hour. Apollo 13, much larger object. It rang like a bell for 3 hours and reverberated for 3 hours. And it got deeper and faster. Like 40 miles in, it was going much faster, meaning there had to be large hollow cavities. And the moon is a quarter the size of Earth and is 1% the density. And we know, like, how many ancient tunnels and caves and all that are beneath our feet. So we're talking a lot more hollow. Our planet is the only one that has a moon this size, that has such a perfect circular orbit. And it seems a strange coincidence that it's at the perfect distance from our planet to perfectly align. And NASA reported between 1570 and 1976, there was 570 unexplained light flashes coming from the moon. And this kind of stuff was reported ever since like Aristotle, like BC. And notice that date, 76, that was 2 years before Apollo 11, in which they stopped counting. I'll show you this footage really quick of them coming back. They do not look like they're on a high from a mission. They look frightened and depressed.
It's a beginning of a new age.
The ancient culture of Tiwanaku, Bolivia, tell of a time when there was no moon. And they said the moon got here between 11,000 years ago and 13,000 years ago, right in that Nibiru sweet spot. And the Greeks and the Romans, BC, told of Proselynes, and they were from ancient Acadia, and they were here in a time when there was no moon. Also, the Zulu of Africa, they tell that the moon is hollow, and inside is a race of highly intelligent reptilian beings. There's the reptilians again. In 1970, 2 Soviet scientists at Soviet Academy of Science, which is like federal, they had a hypothesis that the moon was actually a spacecraft and it was extraterrestrial. They even published an article in Sputnik, which is kind of like Reader's Digest, about it. And the Zulu said that the moon stabilized climate and changed the tides. And this is long before this was known to science. And they said there really was no seasons, and there was just a thick layer of vapor all over the Earth. Like you could only see the sun through vapor. When the moon came, it all fell to Earth and caused a huge flood. And this would explain all the fresh water in the Atlantic Ocean, which is like #1 hypothesis on the Younger Dryas, but really it's just like one ingredient, you know, in the overall recipe. NASA has surprisingly admitted to finding water on the moon and a huge metal plate under the moon, underneath a crater that they said is over 5 times the size of the big island of Hawaii, which is obviously more than just underneath the crater. I think they're saying the crater because they want to use impact theory, but not that I'm saying that these craters aren't significant. It's just that impact theory obviously doesn't fit. For one, if it did, there would be metal under all craters on all surfaces. 2, they use this for everything. They use it for oceans, bodies of water. So how can rock on rock colliding create both oceans and metal? 2 very different elements. Ken Johnson, former NASA contractor, test pilot, and director of photos and data. He said that when he asked about these bases, the domes, that he was asked to destroy the evidence and never talk about it again. Remember Indigo Swan's CIA remote viewing? That was these domes. Now, if you're new, you should see my other video. It reveals that NASA did tests to find out if the moon was hollow, and those tests confirm that it is, and a bunch of information about it being an artificial structure. China sent their lunar rover to the dark side of the moon, where they found a strange colored gel-like substance. Can't even name the color. What does that look like? And a bunch of pyramidal cone volcanoes, and far more of these craters. Now, what are these craters? Why is there so many more on the dark side of the moon where we can't see? I mean, if you think about it, there shouldn't be this many on our side of the moon, which since you're a kid, you're like, oh, the moon looks like a piece of Swiss cheese, and you just don't ask questions. But really, most of the asteroids are in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. So why does the moon look like a piece of Swiss cheese? And, you know, tons of glowing lights. Even like there's a crater called the Blue Gem Crater because it was photographed with blue light. And then aside from that, like 6 different astronomers have reported glowing coming from craters. The moon's orbit is locked to our planet. It's called tidal locking. For the exact time that it takes to spin on this axis is the exact time as it takes to orbit Earth. 27 days. 40% of the moon is always hidden from us. And it's a phenomenon. Where else do we see this? With Proxima b, or Nibiru, tidal locked to its red star. Wonder where they got the idea. And the size of the moon is way too big to be a moon. It's bigger than Pluto, and it's the perfect size to perfectly eclipse the sun. The moon is exactly 400 times smaller than the sun, and the sun is exactly 400 times further away from the moon. When it comes to the solar system, the universe, I don't believe in coincidence. Just like there's 108 moons between the moon and the Earth, 108 suns between the sun and the Earth. The sun is exactly 108 Earths wide. Every single planet can fit between the moon and Earth exactly. How many planets are there in that equation? 8. You can see a satellite, a cooling tower for a nuclear power plant, several spacecraft where you can actually see like shadows underneath. And this is by NASA, so imagine what they don't release. Just like this spacecraft navigating over the moon, not taken by NASA, of course. This is an independent videographer. He also caught this one, some kind of cube under the Earth, which you see a lot of these. I mean, there's deliberate proof on some of these photos where they show the same crater completely edited out. Donna Hare, former NASA contractor, said that they have them edit out UFOs all the time. And yeah, there are things like smokestacks have been found. There's tons of stuff that with all their editing, they still let stuff slip through. This one isn't the moon, but it's pretty cool. It is a spacecraft taking plasma from the sun. And oh yeah, one more thing. The moon is made out of basalt rock, which my old timers know the significance. If you're new, it's just a very significant, highly magnetic, energized rock that is used in a lot of these stone structures, and even Derinkuyu, which shows how easy it is to work with. So it turns out the second photo of the face on Mars, the one I was calling BS on, is BS. Carl Sagan edited it to look like a natural formation, allegedly under the orders of NASA. It's not alleged that he did it, though. He did it factually. It was never in the NASA database. NASA released a statement after it was kind of a public media storm about the face that, oh, you know what, we took another photo a few hours later. It was all just tricks, shadows, it all just went away. Never produced that photo. When they were asked to, they said they lost it. And honestly, you got this photo a few hours later, but you released this one? Just doesn't make sense. DePietro and Molinier looked inside the NASA database and they found that second photo. And it had less shadows and more definition. And there's no doubt about it, this is a face. Between all 3 photos, even the edited ones, way too symmetrical to be a natural formation. And like really on Mars, just like all flat desert land except for these other pyramidal monuments. So why not just send the Mars rover back and prove it's not a face if that's the case? Richard Hoagland had the same idea, and he pushed and he pushed, he campaigned, he took it on air, and finally strong-armed them into going. Took the Mars Observer to outer space. What do you think happened? They lost the Mars Observer and couldn't take the photos. Just like they lost all the footage from Apollo 11, and they're still using this 1979 photo that Carl Sagan edited as representation of that photo. And notice the middle photo. It lost dimension, and then the dimension kind of grew back. Interesting. In 2003, they produced a photo that was so photoshopped, it took 13 filters to reproduce it. I mean, it's just like a fact. Everybody knows what's up now. They've been throwing orange filters on their photos. They don't do it anymore because it's been called out so bad. Make the sky look gray. Independent telescopes have, filmed Mars, and it looks nothing like they show us. There's like atmosphere and blue, probably oceans.
And this is my image of Mars taken from my own telescope at home. This is my own telescope and my image of Mars in the summer. As you can see, Mars is not a red, dry rock. You can see colors. You can see that there's actually fluid there. There's actually most likely water. Now, NASA has admitted that there's billions of tons of liquid water on Mars, and so it's not even a mistake anymore. They also admitted to atmosphere. They also admitted to oxygen and magnetic fields and everything else.
The Sumerian tablets say what happened to Mars was Nibiru coming through our solar system. NASA has admitted that they have a magnetic field. You can see evidence of this pole shift and reversal, and regardless of all that, you can see evidence of water on Mars through these gullies. And they have rivers and oceans They have boats or submarines. They have a tank. There's moving lights. There's, landing marks from a UFO. I've already shown you too many of the statues and skeletons and all that, so I'll just stick to this. But even, with all the editing and hiding, they still can't control all of these photos coming in. Indigo Swan was discovered through American Society of Physical Research, a study in the early 70s, psychic remote viewing, tell them what's in a box and whatnot. This led to his work at Stanford Research Institute, in which he was remote viewing our solar system, and he did a lot of accurate remote viewing, including telling them about the ring on Jupiter that they weren't aware of, and it wasn't even discovered till 1979. This led to his work with the CIA. They just kind of picked him up, said, we'll give you $1,000 a day, which was, a lot more back then, and silenced him for at least 10 years, which is kind of surprising. I thought it would be like in general, which, he was silenced, but he eventually wrote a book called Penetration. So he's asked to remote view the moon. And he says he sees something like tractor marks, like track marks, and patterns from wind, which should be impossible with no atmosphere. And he says he sees a glowing light coming from a crater. He says it's green and diffused, which is interesting. The last 100 years, several people have reported a glowing mist coming from the crater Plato. And just in 1992, the Aristarchus crater was filmed with a blue light. He describes what looks like an airfield and large towers, roads, hangars, domes filled with mist and green light. Now, the mist was not only in Plato's crater, but in 1971, there's a 100 square mile radius on the moon just filled with a mist, a fog, for 14 hours. It should be impossible with no atmosphere. So he sees one of these domes and he goes up to it psychically, and there's a bunch of extraterrestrials that are kind of humanoid creatures. They all look at him at once, and then he has to abort. It's definitely a place of high activity, is what he said. And then they take him to Alaska. They drive a couple hours and make him hike with night vision goggles, completely silent, for 45 minutes. And then he sees a triangle UFO coming out of blue, like fog, that turns purple. And he remote views it, and it picks up a huge body of water. I remember I've talked about this in Brazil, and I was like, what are they doing? So what they're doing is resupplying to take that water to the moon, is what he said. Now, I'm going to show you a little audio recording of him remote viewing Mars, 100,000 BC.
All right, using the information in the envelope, please focus on 40.89 degrees north, 9.55 degrees west.
I want to say it looks like, I don't know, it sort of looks like pyramids. It's very high.
Okay.
I'm seeing, it's like a perception of a shadow of people. Very, very tall, thin. It's only shadow. It's as if they were there and they're not there anymore.
Go back to a period of time where they are there.
I just keep seeing very large people. They appear thin and tall, but they're very large. Wearing some kind of strange clothes.